I mean, I love the session before. We already heard about web APIs, and something we have been definitely seeing across our developers out there, across our organizations out there that we are working with. APIs are really, really growing. And more developers started building web APIs. More and more systems are out there using web APIs. So we really see a big growth here in this area. But with a lot of growth, there also comes a lot of challenges. So something we've been hearing and we've been seeing with a lot of our developers out there is something called API sprawl. So what does it mean? API sprawl, or with a lot of growth, APIs are being developed to different services. They are being hosted on different gateways. They're being published to different platforms. And with all of these APIs basically living everywhere, this can lead to lack of visibility from different standpoints, right? From API developer standpoint, where are all of these APIs out there? Which is the right API that I can be working with? But also from an API manager perspective, whenever we talk about where can we find all of these APIs and where are they being deployed, right? So this is exactly where Azure API Center comes in. Azure API Center is a brand new Azure service. We are currently in public preview, and it's part of the bigger API platform ecosystem. So what is Azure API Center? API Center is your API hub for all of your organizational APIs out there. And whenever we talk about APIs and what are some of the benefits about Azure API Center, we have 3 really good benefits coming with it. The first one is really creating and maintaining this one organizational inventory of all of your APIs out there. It doesn't matter where they are being deployed, where they live, and all of this coming together in one single place. The other is API governance, right? One part of the story is having this complete set of inventories of APIs. And the other one is maybe you want to store additional information on top of your APIs, right? So that's where we are introducing the concept of metadata. And last but not least, we all know the struggle, API discovery. So organizations want to promote API reuse, API discovery to really maximize your developers' productivity. And this is where API Center comes in. API Center, it lives in Azure. We have an Azure portal experience, but every Azure API Center comes with a brand new experience, which is called API Center Portal. But yeah, let me show you what this looks like. So let me switch over to Azure here real quick. And I already set up an Azure API Center here for you. So this is what it looks like. We talked about this inventory of having all of your APIs in one place. So I already generated, based on wherever my APIs are living, this full set of all of your organizational APIs out there. So let's imagine, and let me switch to Visual Studio here. I'm a .NET API developer, right? So everyone knows the good old weather API here. Let me go into my control folder here, and let's see. Currently, this is a very simple one. I have one get functionality, so one operation here, very easy. I'm going to be displaying the date, the temperature, and the summary. So this API has already been deployed to Azure. I think, Jeff, you said as soon as you go out into the API landscape, you're publishing to an app service, and that's kind of it, because you're like, Azure is a total new sphere out there. Let's just do it there. But what if I tell you, while deploying your web API, you can actually easily check this API into your Azure API Center, just from, again, API discovery and from an API inventory perspective here. So while I deployed this web API, I also generated my Open API spec here. And we from Azure API Center, we wanted to make this developer experience as easy as possible to get your API into Azure API Center. So that's where our Azure CLI comes in. And just with one single command, you can now easily upload this API into your Azure API Center instance. So let me hit the enter button here. And what's happening under the hood? So you have to provide, of course, your resource name. You have to provide your Azure API Center name. And then you have to provide your API location. Right now, because I'm in Visual Studio, I generated my Open API spec in my release folder. But of course, you can also point to, let's say, a URL, let's say a GitHub URL. So these are two different ways how to bring in your APIs. So what happens whenever I hit the command line? First of all, we will be generating an API for you. We will be registering this API for you. We have detected automatically the API version. We have detected the API definition and uploaded the spec into Azure API Center. Let's check this out, what this looks like. Let's hit the refresh button. And perfect, you can see my weather API has been registered in my API hub. So we talked about API governance, right? We talked about custom metadata. So what does it mean? Within Azure API Center, API Manager, API Program Managers have a way to define what are some additional informations you want to expose, you want to log on top of your APIs. Currently, I have 3 custom metadatas defined. So whenever looking at my weather API here, I have a way to register these additional informations about my API. So for example, my API approver, I want to log an email address here. What about my cost center, for example? Let's call it marketing.net because I want my friends from .net to pay or be in charge of this API. And then about a compliance status, let's call it open and save it. So these are additional information that I will be storing on top of my APIs just to keep this entire inventory that I'm creating about my APIs completely and full and have all of these additional informations out there. All right, so we talked about registering APIs. We talked about the inventory. We talked about API governance with metadata. So what about discovery, right? So I mentioned that Azure API Center comes with an API Center portal. This portal can be shared with all of your internal stakeholders, with API developers, with API managers, for them to really explore and find all of these APIs out there. This is what the portal experience looks like for the first time whenever I'm clicking on the link here. Let me sign in and let me show you what this looks like for my Julia account here. Click next. Sign in. And all right, I'm getting a notification here. It seems like I'm not authorized. So let's quickly change that. In Azure API Center, you have a way to control who has access to these APIs that are within your API Center instance, because of course we want to make sure that only authorized users have access to all of these APIs. So via access control, you can assign a role assignment to persons, to groups, to service principals, and really make sure that only authorized users have access to all of your APIs out there. Let me select my Julia account here. Let's review and let's add this role assignment. Perfect. And let's check out what this experience looks like now. Let me sign in here one more time. And perfect. Now, because I'm authorized, I'm able to see all of my APIs here. There are different ways how you can display your APIs within the API Center portal. You can also filter or search for all of these APIs that are within your API Center instance. Let's search for my weather API. Hit enter. And perfect. Currently, because we have 2 APIs that are related or have something to do with weather, there are different ways what you can do with these APIs within your Azure API Center portal. So for example, let's say I want to share this API. So I can easily generate an email, or I can copy the link and share it with another developer who I want to notify, hey, I've just previously built up this web API. Just check it out. Maybe you want to do something with it. And share some information. Whenever I click on it, I will get additional information about this API. I also have a way to download the API spec. So Jeff, this is great, right? We have a center portal experience. But something we really, or some folks we really care about is the developer experience. And we want to meet developers where they're at. So I'm super excited to talk about and show you the Visual Studio Code extension we are currently building. So this is in this is in preview, but I'm just so excited to show you what you can actually do with the Visual Studio Code extension that I couldn't keep myself and show this to you today. We have a Visual Studio Code extension. It's called API Center. And again, everything is about API discovery. So you can see all of these APIs here, and let me hit the refresh button. You can find them now within your IDE. You don't have to leave. I'm already building my web API here. Now you want to find all of these APIs out there. You don't even have to leave your IDE. Great. So let's imagine there is not just 6 APIs here. Let's imagine you're a really big company and there are a bunch of APIs here. And you don't really know, first of all, what am I searching for? And this is where we are working with GitHub Copilot to make this experience as seamless as possible. So you can reference API Center here, and we have a bunch of commands that you can use. Let's use the find command here. I want to find, let's say, an API about speakers. My marketing team came to me. They have a request. Hey, can you build me an application because we want to build an application for a conference and you need to call speakers or you need to call a database about speakers. But I'm not sure what's the API out there that I can call, that I can use. So let's find it. I'm going to hit the enter button here and see what GitHub Copilot is doing for me and how is it helping my developer journey here. Perfect. I'm already seeing a bunch of information coming up. This is great. So let me go to the beginning here. Already, I can see some information. So it seems like we have a demo conference API here. I can see a little bit of description. So I'm getting more information about the API itself. All right, this is great. Not quite. I need a little bit more information about this API. So let's again call API Center /describe. And now I want to describe speaker because I want to get more information about my endpoint, right? I want to know about all of the operations out there, what I can do with it, and what are some of the responses I might even be getting. So perfect. I can already see I have a bunch of get operations here. You get a bunch of information about what are all the operations out there. And this extremely helps me with my journey of building this web application. All right, so I found the API. I know what it's about. I've seen the operations as well. Now I want to build this web application, right? So let's call API Center again. And now I want to know how I can integrate this or what I can do with it from a code perspective, right? So let me call speaker again. And because I'm a .NET developer, I want to easily generate a code snippet for me. Let me enter this one here because I want to easily get started with building and integrating with this web API. So perfect, I can get a code snippet, I can copy it, and now continue with my developer journey here. Let's switch back over to our Azure API Center code extension. Let's go back to my weather API, right? I've developed my weather API. I've published it to Azure API Center. What else is there that I can do with my Visual Studio Code extension? So let me open this and see what are some of the things that I can do. I can open the specification. This is very similar to the experience we have seen in the portal. It basically shows me my open API spec. I can also open documentation. So let me click on this. And what this will do is it will provide me within my IDE a Swagger preview. So here you can see my weather API. Let's see if I can test it and see what are some of the responses. So I can hit the execute button just because I don't want to leave my IDE, right? I want to be I want to build and I want to test whatever I'm doing in my IDE right where I am. Perfect. I'm getting a 200. I'm getting the response body. So I can better familiarize myself with the API. What else can I do? we know Postman is an integration, or is a tool that a lot of developers out there are working with. So we are collaborating with Postman to make a seamless experience for you out there, and for you, again, to not having to leave your IDE. So whenever I want to open this in Postman, this will be using the Postman extension. And very similar, now you have a way to test this web API that you already have in Azure API Center within your IDE, within Postman. So let's check this out as well. Again, this is using the Postman integration. I love the user experience here. I can, again, test it and see what's happening. I'm getting a 200, so this is great. And again, I'm seeing the body responses here as well. All right, so we talked about API discovery. And for all of you who have been paying attention, we wanted to take it a step further. API discovery is great. I was able to test it, to see the specification, to see what's going on with the right API that I found previously. But now let's bring me back to the use case. I want to build an application, and I want to use these web APIs, right? How do we shift now the mode from finding and developing these APIs to consuming these web APIs? Let's switch back over to my conference API here. This one is a little bit more fun and it has more operations that I can be using. So I can easily, from within Visual Studio, generate an API client. So first of all, I have a way to select what are some of the endpoints that I want to use for my client generation. And because we talked about speaker, I'm going to be adding the speakers here and hit the generate button so I can generate my API client here. SDK, my project, .NET. Now it asks me what kind of language. Again, we are .NET developers, so we want to use the C# library. I'm going to be hitting my enter button, and this will now generate my SDK client for me. And now I don't even have to leave my I don't have to leave my IDE. I can switch back over to my web application, and I can start building this web application for my marketing team while using the client SDK that I just generated, to make it a real seamless experience from developing your APIs, but also using and consuming these web APIs in different projects, in different systems, whatever you want to do with it. So let me summarize what we have seen today, right? So we've seen Azure API Center. We've seen how easy it is to generate this organizational hub of all of your APIs out there. We took the web API that I previously built and put it into Azure API Center via our CLI with just one command line. Then we talked about governance. I added custom metadata to my API because I want to store additional information about my API to make it easier to find, but also for my API managers or API program managers out there to make it easier for them to find information about my APIs as well. And then we talked about API discovery. We looked at the API Center portal experience, but also because we love developers, we also looked at the Visual Studio extension. We looked at the API Center extension and what you can do with it, from testing, finding, but also to generating your API client here as well. Azure API Center is currently in public preview. We are looking at GA next year, March 2024. If you want to stay in touch, if you want to know what's going on, what are some of the features we are currently working on, feel free to sign up for our newsletter. We will be sending out some updates on all of these features. What are some of the things that we are working on is registering APIs should be as easy as possible. So we are looking at GitHub Actions integration, DevOps pipeline integration to really make it work with your CI/CD pipeline. But also in terms of governance, we've heard from a lot of developers, API governance is still something a lot of organizations or developers are struggling out there with. So API guidelines and API linting is something we are looking with to solve with API Center as well. And then we just looked at the Visual Studio Code extension, but in terms of API portal experience, this is something where we will be providing a backstage plugin for organizations out there to build their own API portal experience as well. So yeah, let us know. Feel free to test it, provide feedback. that's what the preview is all about, right? We want to get customer feedback, developer feedback in as soon as possible before we are releasing it to GA. So feel free to reach out via our GitHub repository, or just ping us whenever you have any feedback on this. I'm super excited, and let's head it back over to the studio and see if there are any questions.
Okay, Julia, you've got me convinced. As somebody who's built kind of a rat's nest of various features and APIs out there, and they're just kind of out there, and I'm going to figure out which ones I'm going to connect to. Much more organized, being able to generate clients, test and interact directly from within VS Code. So that means I'll be able to use that on Windows, Mac, or Linux, wherever I have VS Code, maybe even code spaces also, right?
Yeah, we are definitely looking at integrations across different platforms, across different services and tools, and looking at integrations there as well. Again, that's what the preview is for. We want to learn and listen to the developers out there and tackle some of their challenges or some of their use cases. So again, if there are any things we are missing from your guys' perspective, let us know and feel free to reach out.
So chat room, all right? Let us know. Julia needs your feedback. Kalyani on YouTube chimes in and says, great demo. Love seeing Copilot help out with that. Yeah, that looks like a killer feature to bring in there. There were one or two other messages that were here. There was a comment here. It's kind of split over two lines here. How API Manager plays into this, since this person, Deflux Streams, already manages some of this stuff in their .NET code. How is there some way to level up into this, into using the API Center, if we've already got a little bit of management out there?
Yeah, great story. So we're definitely working together with our friends from Azure API Management to have a good story between the two services here as well. And maybe even think about, you're already managing your Azure API Management instance. How, is there a good way for bringing all of these APIs into API Center as well? So that's something we're looking at as well. For API Manager in particular, I would call out the Azure Portal experience. So they are in charge for this organizational hub. They are in charge for setting it up, making it compliant, thinking about the custom metadata that they want to store on top of their APIs. So that's really what this experience, or where the user journey of the API Manager comes in, and they can really level up the API first strategies for their organizations, with hopefully Azure API Center.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julia. It's been great talking to you. I'm going to spend some time next week diving in and learning more about API Center. Really appreciate you joining us here at .NET Conf.
Thank you, Jeff.